Hello everyone, welcome to week 3 of IS 688. In this lecture I'll be going over some logistics for Module 2, starting off with some announcements. First, for the Module 1 assignment, or your first medium assignment, note that that is due now. As with all the medium assignments in this course, this is a soft deadline, but you should be thinking about, I should have Module 1 due about now. You want to make sure that you don't get too behind here. When you publish your story to Medium, be sure and tag it with the appropriate tag, as I've listed here, just so we can make sure that it pops up in the appropriate assignment list on the course publication. We talked about the rubric last time. Do remember the main most critical thing about your motivation. You want to have motivation that's more than just we have this data and we want to answer this question because it's interesting. You need to be thinking about a specific question that a person may have about this data that helps them learn something from a business use case or use this data or take some insight away and take action on it. So remember, the core point of data mining and web mining, we want some actionable insight. What is the actionable insight here? What is the insight that is answering some specific question here? We talked about excellence last time, so I won't belabor you with that. Remember, once you have written your publication for Medium, you want to publish it, but you want to also make sure you submit it to the course publication. So do that there. I've got some directions for that already you can check out. Now we'll talk about the assignment for Module 2, so that's now available to do in 2 weeks. The difference here is instead of talking about just general kind of web mining or data mining that we did in Assignment 1, now we get to look at using the methods of graph mining or graph construction from Chapters 5 and Chapter 10 to understand general structures of the internet or networks therein and how we might analyze them, to learn things about centrality or importance or identify authoritative sources, make metrics that are more robust, how we may evaluate similarity among nodes in the network, all kinds of things here you have the ability to do. As with Module 1, you need to collect your own data set for this assignment. We'll relax this constraint moving forward in some of the other assignments where you can use pre-existing data sets here or in the future, but for this particular assignment, as with Module 1 assignment, you need to collect your own data. As before, you want to have a strong motivation. Think about, for a particular data set that you've collected, or what particular question do you have, what's the actionable insight you're pulling out, what's the reason why this question is interesting or valuable to a human who then may do something downstream to take action on whatever answer to that question you provide. Be sure and be clear about that. Another thing to be very clear on, you want to discuss where your network data came from, but also what the constructs in your network actually mean. So if you're looking at web data and you want to build a network of websites citing each other, what are the nodes and edges here? The nodes might be websites and the edges might be citations. If you're looking at Wikipedia, the nodes may be pages and edges might be citations. If you're looking at social network data, you need to be specific about what the nodes and the edges represent. Nodes may be accounts or images and edges may be retweets or something like that, but you need to explicitly say what your nodes and edges represent and then how you built the graph from your data. Then I want you to describe some structural things about the graph. Is it dense? Is it centralized? Something about its structure, some visualization, good questions about structure. And I want you to define metric of importance. Now, if you're talking about centrality, which centrality metric are you going to use here? PageRank, betweenness centrality, degree centrality, all these are different ways that we can define importance, but you need to be specific. Which centrality metric are you using to define importance or to measure importance, and why is that specific metric of interest or of value to your research question? And then once you have that, you can just identify or use this metric to rank a set of nodes and say what you think are important about these nodes. And then the sort of standard kinds of questions that you need to have in all of your Medium posts. Which software did you use? How'd you build this? Did you run into any bugs? If so, how'd you fix them? Make sure you include good figures here. There's a good opportunity to do visualization for graphs with Gephi or NetworkX. There's a number of ways you can do visualization here. So there's good opportunity for figures. What are the limitations? And then what's your major takeaway? And as before, make sure you tag your story. The rubric for the Medium 2 assignment is essentially similar to what you've seen already. Be sure you have a strong motivation, answer some specific question. A key point here when you talk about the structure of your graph, remember to define importance. Which centrality metric did you use and why? Number of points come from making sure you are clear about what importance means and how are you defining it or interpreting it for your particular research question. I have a GitHub repository where you can go see some content about this for collection, some other examples, so be sure and check that out. All right, moving on to the semester project. Your project proposal should now be due. This needs to be in to me as soon as possible if you haven't already gotten it in, because the semester project deadlines are in fact hard deadlines. So most of you have already talked to me, had the opportunity to engage with me about your proposal. That's great. When you submit your proposal to me, I'll give you some feedback, and then you'll have the opportunity to revise and resubmit to get some points back if I have taken off any points for concerns or questions. Once you have your project underway, you can go and post any questions or concerns you have about the semester project overall, or what you're doing in particular in the project discussion forum. It's questions that you haven't had the chance to ask me in our meetings, or questions that you think other people in the class may benefit from. Feel free to post those here. All right, so that's the logistics for where we are in the course. This week, we'll talk about a number of objectives for the lecture as we dive into graphs and the internet. First, I want you to be able to construct graphs of different kinds from web structures and different kinds of web structures, Wikipedia, internet pages, social networks, those kinds of things. Then I want you to be able to explain the vulnerabilities in search engines that may come from the kinds of centrality metrics you use, or how we might assess what is important in a node. We'll talk about that. Explain PageRank and how Google was able to create a better search engine using an interesting method for assessing authority in a graph while addressing some of the vulnerabilities that we just discussed. Then talk about or be able to build transition matrices from your network structures, and finally be able to talk about different kinds of centrality. So we'll have different centrality metrics, but there's also hubs and authorities, or different kinds of ways to measure centrality, or different kinds of authoritative sources in a network. So those are the 5 main learning objectives for this part of the lecture. As with all the modules, there's a Module 2 discussion forum where you can ask questions about any of this. Now, there's the separate lecture that introduces all of these topics and goes through these objectives. I'll have a link to that in Canvas. Check that out. For next week, though, we will go from Chapter 5 on to Chapter 10. We talk about mining social networks and graphs. Specifically, I want you to read sections 10.1 and 10.2 and 10.6. Most of my research is in the social network analysis space, so I think this is a really cool area. Happy to talk more about it at any point if you like. Note that the Module 2 assignment for this is available, as we've already discussed. There's a GitHub repository where you can see some examples for this. For the people who have gotten your proposals in, expect some feedback from me about these relatively quickly, because the next thing you have to work on is the data collection report, which is due at the beginning of next month. Note, this is as you start working on your project, you move into the life of a project where now you actually are committed to doing the things that you proposed to do in your proposal. Now, most of those hopefully will be things that you actually can do. If you run into any major snags, we can discuss and tweak your proposal as needed. But for the data collection report, we'll talk about more about this in the coming weeks. You don't have to have all your collection done, but you need to be able to answer questions about where's your data coming from, how much data are you going to get, what kind of formats are you using for storage. At least you have thought through some of these questions and have done some collection here, so you are on the ground running, essentially, with these projects. All right, and if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to email me or post in any of the discussion forums.